Good morning, business owners. Mike Bosma, your host of Bosma on Business, and happy Saturday morning to you if you're doing this live. If not, happy video podcasting. You can digest this installment of Bosma on Business at your leisure. Of course, each and every Saturday, 60 minutes of action-packed business adventure. My name, Mike Bosma. You're a business-savvy CPA and host of the show for going on the last 14 years. Of course, it's been interesting now that we've gone to video, getting actually a lot. We've always had good feedback on the show, but more good feedback since it's a little bit more interactive. Of course, I don't understand it at all because I was told early on in this gig I had a face for radio. Not sure exactly what that means, but in today's installment of Bosma on Business, somebody who actually has a face for TV, Liz Fletcher. She's an attorney and founder, chief cook, and bottle washer of Fletcher Law. Liz, welcome to Bosma on Business.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, anytime you're talking to a bankruptcy attorney, most people aren't happy to be in that situation, whether they're, whatever side of the bargaining table they're on, whether they're in bankruptcy or they're a creditor in bankruptcy, nobody's happy that they're there. So Liz, you get to meet with people in not the most opportune times.
Right.
How did you get into this business? That's what I want to know.
Well, I didn't go to law school to do bankruptcy law. I practiced in various firms before this. I clerked for a judge, and I was at a firm when I decided I was going to leave because my partner, who's now retired, asked if I could do contract work for her. And so I left the firm and I started doing contract work for her, and her focus was all bankruptcy. I didn't know anything about bankruptcy. And so that's how I got into it. And then eventually she pulled me in as an associate and then made me a partner, and now she's retired. So it's mine.
The bait and switch. Okay,
yeah.
It worked. Okay.
Yeah.
And how long have you been focusing on bankruptcy law?
About 16 years.
Okay, so a novice, truly a novice. Okay, so Brent, no, right, because there's a lot to it. So I guess that's where we talk about bankruptcy law. The goal of today's installment of Bosma on Business is to not just understand how the system works, it's how to navigate. So if you're in this unfortunate situation that you find yourself either as a debtor or a creditor, that you've done what you need to do to not get bad outcomes. So, that's right. Isn't that the goal?
That is the goal. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. And I would say, having gone through a bankruptcy matter with Liz, I learned all kinds of bad news, right? and that's where it is interesting, right? As just a business owner, I've been doing this for a while. And you see tons of transactions, definitely as a CPA, just as an entrepreneur in town. You see a ton of transactions, you see how things happen. And then all of a sudden you get into litigation and everything. They're like, oh, well, you didn't do that, or you did do that, or, what's going on? And I think those are the things we really want to press into about making sure, and we're talking about on both sides, right? The good, the bad, the ugly of, if you're primarily a business owner, I guess we could touch on the individuals there too. But if you're a business owners, some of the war stories of what not to do and then how that blew up in bankruptcy. So,
right.
So what's the worst thing you've ever seen? What's the most egregious thing you've ever seen a business owner do in this practice?
Well, I'd say in the bankruptcy context, it's hiding assets.
Right. Somebody would hide assets from their creditors? I can't believe it. My goodness.
It's very rare. No.
Right.
It happens all the time, obviously. And so, people, before they file bankruptcy, tend to transfer out the assets out of reach of creditors. And that is not allowed under the bankruptcy code or the Nevada statute. It's called a fraudulent transfer.
So the phrase that pays is to stay out of fraudulent transfer land, which means you need to transfer all your assets before you're in trouble.
That is true. That is true. You want to make your assets you want to make your non-exempt assets exempt. Right. So what that means is under the Nevada statutes, actually there's federal or Nevada. Nevada, they're better than the federal statute. You get a certain amount of assets when you file for bankruptcy, right? And protection from creditors. And so you want to get everything that you own into those categories before you file bankruptcy. And you can't do it with the intention of hiding the assets.
So that's where, if you're listening to the show, if you're watching the show right now, And you're like going, I don't need to worry about getting all my assets to make them exempt. Now's the time to do it.
Exactly.
Because you can't do it when all of a sudden there's line of sight. Oh, didn't see that coming. Right. And it can happen like that. Think about COVID. How many businesses did COVID take out overnight? Right. All of a sudden, Fauci shut down the world, and people, now you have to, what's it called? I got to, whatever, hygiene in place. I can't remember the term, right? Where all of a sudden, like, I can't walk out of my business. I have this flourishing business. It's a restaurant. Now I'm closed.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? And all of a sudden, like that, you go from, I'm fine, I don't need to worry about this, to, oh, it's too late. Now now there is a threat. Now if I start moving assets, it's too late. So that's why it's like this idea, for the benefit of our listeners, we focused on business owners, don't own anything. Why would you?
Well,
right?
Partially. The other piece of that is don't borrow more than you can pay. And that's easy to say,
Easier said than done, Liz.
Exactly. I understand that. But it is the people who start borrowing more money than that business can support that get themselves into the trouble.
Well, I guess I go back to the Great Recession, right? And people, and I think we're kind of on a little bit of a bubble right now. I could see some signs that things are going to sour a bit. And so let's put it this way. In the Great Recession, it just made a ton of sense. I'm going to buy as much real estate as the banks would lend to me. I'll rent it out for something less than it's cash flowing. And it doesn't matter, because in 6, 9, 12 months, I'm going to sell it and make hundreds of thousands of dollars. No big deal. And that was great until it wasn't. It had literally changed overnight.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, well, I can't afford the debt service on this, and now the values have plummeted. Now what do I do? Probably if people are watching this, and let's think about this. What are some asses? Oh, right. You've got Bitcoin. If you have Bitcoin that you own personally, you're a moron. You're an idiot. Okay.
Right.
Shame on you. Why would you do that? Right. Because here's an asset. It's appreciated wildly. You're probably so enamored with it, you don't want to ever sell it, because I don't want to lose any of the upside. So you own it individually, and then heaven forbid something happened. This happened. I had a client. We have this huge audit practice. Other CPAs, we defend their clients when the IRS comes a knocking. And this one guy, he had tens of millions of dollars of Bitcoin, right? And he doesn't want to sell it, but he had it all individually. Then all of a sudden he ended up audited. He didn't think he owed the IRS all this money. Oh no. Now he owes the IRS all this money. Now he's having to liquidate his Bitcoin. Right. Now he has it, because as the IRS has an opinion, if you're mining Bitcoin, that's ordinary income. I mean, it's terrible, right? It's draconian. But what, you're going to fight the government? So, like I said, if you own Bitcoin, get it into, I think it's called a Nevada Self-Settled Spendthrift Trust. Did I get that right, Liz?
You did. Yes, you did.
Okay. How does it work?
Well, a spendthrift trust is a trust that has a provision in it where there's a trustee in charge, and the beneficiary, which would be you, right, if you were doing a trust, and you have a trustee in charge that distributes the money. And the way that the provisions are written is important. Sometimes there's a contingent distribution. Sometimes there's a mandatory distribution. There's various protections for the different kinds of distributions under the Nevada statute. Actually, any trust with a contingent distribution provision, meaning you don't have to distribute, but you could if you wanted to, right? Those are protected under the statute.
Right. And so the idea is you have your Bitcoin, right?
Right.
You coveted Bitcoin, right? Millions and millions, maybe tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And you get it into this before there's litigation, before there's anything.
Right.
Just put it into the trust, you knucklehead. So all you got to just put it in the trust. It's a simple thing, right? It takes 2 years for this to season, right? So in this time, then if you have creditors' claims in that 2 years, it's at risk. But once you're beyond the 2 years, right? The only thing they can compel the trustee to make a distribution, because the trustee isn't you, the grantor, is health, education, maintenance, and support. Creditors isn't on the list.
Right.
Creditors. So like that Bitcoin example, right, that we're defending another CPA, right? If it was my client, I told him, get all this Bitcoin out of your estate, get it into something that's asset protected, and all of a sudden this terrible audit happens. They didn't realize that the IRS had a different opinion on the rules on how this is all taxed. Had they done that 2 years before, right, then they get audited. Oh, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. I literally have no assets outside of my crypto. Right? Now it's safe. Right? They can't compel the trustee to make a distribution.
They can't.
And so now,
unless if there's a mandatory provision in there,
right? But that's why you don't put those in there,
right?
Right.
But those are also protected under the exemption statutes,
right?
To some extent, yeah.
But anyway, and the reason I just mentioned is just like one case of where, like, with the benefit of hindsight, right? Like, because that's what everybody does, Liz, right? It's just, no, this unfortunate thing happened. I got over my skis. I got too much debt. Or, I mean, I've seen it where somebody had a stroke. They didn't plan on having a stroke, and now they're disabled.
Yes.
Well, now they can't afford the home up in wherever. They can't afford the second home in this other place. They're barely holding on. They didn't know they needed disability insurance. So they're having to go to Social Security and get whatever disability benefit they're going to get there. They've got to, and they're like, but I've amassed a goodly amount of wealth. Oh, well, if I'd have protected what could have been an exempt asset in this unfortunate situation, now those are going to my creditors rather than my family.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to yourself?
Well, I think people hesitate to put money into a spendthrift trust because they lose control over it, right? The trustee is in charge. You can't make the trustee do anything. But that's it depends on who the trustee is. You get to pick that person, and as long as it's on the up and up, you're not actually controlling the trustee. The trustee is making the decisions, then it's okay.
Well, and that's where it's a good point, Liz, right? Where I'm concerned, I have to have an independent trustee, and they're going to drive the wealth that's in this trust. Fine. What do we do? All of a sudden, you're as a beneficiary, please, Mr. Trustee, please. I want to feed my children. I'm hungry. Right? Oh, and then they say, no, too bad, so sad. I'm not going to give it to you. When we come back, Liz Fletcher is going to talk to us about those protections you can put in that trust to boot the trustee when they're not taking care of your health, education, maintenance, support. When we come back, it's Bosma on Business.
I was born with a congenital heart defect and almost died. But thanks to research funded by the American Heart Association, I had heart surgery that saved my life. Learn more at helpheart.org.
Welcome back to Bosma on Business. Your host, Mike Bosma, out of studio, Liz Fletcher from Fletcher Law Group, talking about how her former business partner roped her into the practice of bankruptcy. But isn't that like life, right? Where our path in our career just finds us?
It really did just drop into my lap. And actually, I feel very, very lucky for the situation that I got, because my partner, Cecilia, essentially just brought me in, mentored me, taught me bankruptcy, and then pretty much gave me her firm. And that doesn't happen to everybody. And so I feel very lucky that was my situation.
Right. Yeah, if you can get the firm for free. Now,
yeah, she said, well, you're a hard worker. It should go to you. But a lot of people are hard workers, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's where, the business broker part of our world, right, is succession planning. How do you make all this happen? And I think, as we're talking about, bankruptcy law and the process and the surprises, right? I asked you the most egregious, right? Things like, well, somebody who's, immediately prior to bankruptcy, they start moving assets, get them gone. And what I'm saying is, get them gone today before there's a sniff of litigation. There's a sniff of bankruptcy, right? You should own zero. If there's no there's a handful of assets that it's okay to own, right? It's okay to own your home, right? Why is it okay to own your home, Liz?
Because there's an exemption under Nevada law, which is one of the higher ones in the country. $605,000 in equity. So what that means is, after you pay that first mortgage off, second mortgage or whatever, then how much equity do you have left? And it's protected from creditors up to $605,000. Right. If it's over and above that, then you either have to pay the creditor who has recorded against your house, or you have to pay into the bankruptcy estate.
Sure. Yeah, and I think those are things, when you look at the administration of a bankruptcy proceeding, and like what have the discussion with Liz today, right? Just call her, right? She'll and say, hey, I don't think I'm ever going to file bankruptcy. That's my goal. My life's goal is never to have to need you.
Right.
Don't take it personally.
Yeah. No,
right?
That's what I say to people. Hopefully you don't need me again.
Hopefully you never need me.
Right.
But I'm going to talk to you about, okay, how to be smart about, like the stuff you see in bankruptcy court to make sure that that's not a problem. And I'll just give you an example because this is one that's near and dear to my heart. So I made a loan to a friend and got sued for making a loan to a friend. A friend files bankruptcy. Liz defends us in our secured claim. Well, one of the things we had as security, as collateral for the loan, was a partnership interest, right? So they had a partnership that had wealth, and I'm like, hey, we're hard money lenders. Let's just make sure we get repaid. And so, Great Recession happens. There's not enough equity in the house. Let's just make sure we have a backup position just to make sure we get paid. And our attorney that drafted that didn't know that we needed to file a UCC-1 on that and record that with the recorder's office. So we have collateral for the loan. They're like, oh, well, where's the recording? I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? Well, the attorney didn't tell us to file. So it's like all that stuff that Liz knows, right? Yeah. Because she's like, yeah, that's why you have to work with your estate planner, right? On, okay, this is the estate planning, and then work with Liz on this is how this gets messed up and if this ever gets to this unfortunate situation. So that's where you're really working in tandem, right? And that's where I learned that. It was like, well, I never knew that my attorney, who's a long-term 30-year practicing contract attorney in Northern Nevada, right? He didn't know a UCC-1 and the reason he didn't know is because nobody ever challenged a claim against the guarantee of a partnership interest as a pledge for a loan, for a secured loan.
Right. But in bankruptcy, it's considered personal property, right?
Right.
And so that comes into the bankruptcy estate. And if you haven't done what's called perfected your interest in that property by telling the whole world, I have an interest in this property, you still have an interest in it, but the rest of the world doesn't know that, right? So that's the part that you have to do to make it a solid security interest. Right. Same with recording against a house.
Mm-hmm. Right. You have to tell the world, right? Record it. And you want to, and so those are all the, cross the T's, dot the I's, that, and that's where, especially when you talk about long-term planning, I see it all the time. You go and you do your revocable living trust, your family trust, your living trust, and you don't fund it. You die. Well, now you have to go through probate. You did the trust not to go through probate, but now you're having to go through probate because you didn't actually transfer the assets to the trust, right? Same thing with your irrevocable trust, this Nevada self-settled spendthrift trust, or any other kind of irrevocable trust, where you're like, you have to move the assets into it, right? There has to be a paper trail. And I guarantee if you think, oh, well, I'll paper it later, and then something happens, now, in fact, that's what I learned going through this litigation with you, Liz, is that the system is baked, right? The system is bent against secured creditors, right? And maybe I have my own unique bias, but the reason I say that is okay, Liz, will you tell me, how does the trustee get paid? Is it based on the amount of secured claims or unsecured claims?
It's based on the amount it's a very complicated formula, but it's based on the amount that he or she distributes to creditors, unsecured creditors.
Unsecured creditors.
Right.
So who do you think when the trustee is trying to decide, oh, well, are you really a secured creditor? They get paid if you're not a secured creditor. So all of a sudden now, you're like this with the trustee, and they're trying to swipe your assets that you thought you had completely secured. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I didn't quite do that right. Now they're using that to get those assets for the benefit of the unsecured. And you're like going, what? I had attorneys that did this. They consulted on the whole thing. Nobody said anything about this. You know why? Because they never had to defend this in bankruptcy before.
Right. And they're not bankruptcy attorneys who set that up.
They're not bankruptcy attorneys, right.
But you didn't think when you were making a loan that it was going to go down that road, right?
Of course not.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, you do need to make sure that all of the things are done exactly right, because when you get into bankruptcy, there's very specific rules about separate entities and certain things you need to do to protect property. Those are pretty hard and fast rules. Yeah.
Well, that's what, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you are correct that the trustee, most trustees that I have worked with have good intentions. They want to recover, not just to get paid, but they would like to recover for unsecured creditors. That's their job, is to bring in money to pay the creditors. So, but you are right. They do get paid out of that.
So that's where you just understand where, I'm not saying they're bad people.
Right.
I'm saying you just understand what people's motivations are. So Liz, that segment went by super fast. So when we come back, we're talking about a trust protector and the concept of a trust, and how to fire your trustee if you need to keep control, air quotes, control of your assets. We come back. It's Bosma on Business.
What if you had some money waiting for you at the IRS? Money you could use to fix up the house, tune up the car, get a little something for the family, or save for a rainy day. If you worked and didn't make much money last year, find out about the Earned Income Tax Credit at irs.gov. It makes life a little easier.
Welcome back to Bosma on Business. Your host, Mike Bosma, in studio or out of studio, Liz Fletcher from Fletcher Law. Talking about, just make sure we're just very clear, right? If you own anything, you're an idiot. Ever get it out of what you own, right? You don't want it titled in your name, right? So if it should at a minimum be in your living trust, and a maximum be in some irrevocable trust. It's not, if you have any amount of wealth that's worth protecting, get it out of your estate. Get it out so you don't own it. And we talked about actually the first segment, second segment blew by. It's how it works. Talking about, well, what happens if your trustee is not helping you, right? If all of a sudden now you're at odds with your trustee. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Trustee, I need some cash to, continue the lifestyle that I grew up accustomed. The trustee says no bueno. There's a provision in statute, or not in the statute, but in a lot of trusts, they do this thing called a trust protector, and that says, hey, there's somebody else that can fire the trustee. You can't, right, as a beneficiary, but somebody else can. So, and they hold that to a fiduciary standard. So I think those are things where if you're worried, as Liz said before, you're worried about, well, I'm going to give up control of my assets, because you do. That's true. Right. But you give up control.
With their irrevocable trust, you give it up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
With a revocable trust, because I have one,
right.
I control that trust.
Didn't you put all your money into an irrevocable trust list? We need to talk. I can help you.
I did not. I just have a revocable trust, and so that means I can cancel that trust at any time. And irrevocable is a lot harder to do. Right.
Well, but that's where, and think of it this way, right? So in life, talking about, Keystone, business brokerage, CPA, and wealth advisory. So we're going to wealth advisory for a second. And that is, the idea is, Liz, you're a very successful bankruptcy attorney. Now, if you mess up and somebody's harmed because you committed malpractice, as I believe I understand it, they can sue you through the company, through the assets of the company. Then they can sue you individually if you individually mess that up, and they can come after all your personal assets. Now, you're a very talented attorney. I couldn't imagine you do anything wrong, but nobody ever imagines them doing anything wrong, right? Like this other attorney didn't know we needed a UCC to perfect.
Right.
An interest, a collateral interest for a loan. We had recourse to go after that person because he committed, I would believe, malpractice. He's like, he should have told us. He didn't know.
Yeah.
Right? It's not what nobody does anything intentionally. It's what they didn't know. They don't know what they don't know. So that's why I'm like, especially if you're a professional, right? You're a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, that has individual exposure. The game here, people, is to get that out of your reach of creditors and you have to do it before there's a problem. So, and the idea is, Liz, you're practicing law. You're very talented. I appreciate all you've done. But I think the idea is you don't want to do this for the rest of your life, right? You want to be able to, as you're earning money in the practice of law, you take some of that money, you set it aside for, either the rainy day fund or the investment fund, the retirement fund, all those things. Now, retirement assets, they're exempt, right? You don't have to worry about creditors sweeping in on those. Is that right?
Up to $1 million.
Up to $1 million. Okay. So, so you get the get out of jail free on retirement assets up to $1 million. Fine. Yay. Which if you can get $1 million in your retirement account, God bless you. So you're probably okay. But the rest of it, right, all those other after tax, all those other things that aren't in that $1 million of retirement account, You put that in your irrevocable trust. You do it before you're in trouble, because all it's going to do is just sit there and earn money and grow as you fund it, just make more, fund it over time. And that's where it's like, it's still your money. It's still for your benefit, but now heaven forbid something happens. It's outside of, creditors' claims, it's outside their purview. Right.
Right. And, just to go back, that's why you have malpractice insurance, right? But you're right. The amount that you can spare that you don't want to touch, that's not in a retirement account, that, best case scenario should go into an irrevocable trust.
Right. No, that's it. Right. And that's just like just trying to give these little nuggets for people, right? To say, okay, what's actionable? Okay, irrevocable trust. Make sure that it's properly executed before you have a problem. And it's just, it's for your benefit. It's the same as yours. Now, of course, the other thing that's really nice about that, don't tell anybody. I think, don't quote me, just you and me, Liz, just you and me, nobody else.
All right.
But I think all of a sudden, you get into a pickle, like, let's say, for example, end of life, right? Oh, now I think you qualify for Medicaid because it's not your assets, right? They're not yours. You're good, right?
Well, I don't know a lot about the Medicaid spend down provision, so that's not something that I do actually need to figure that out just for my own family. Right. But you're right. I think there's ways to protect those assets and then be able to reach the Medicaid. Yeah.
Well, and the reason I said it, so like my dad passed in June. And, God bless, I love him, but he's my dad. But, he basically lived the last 10 years in a fifth wheel next to my Aunt Mary's house. Okay. So plug in, antenna, he's golden, living his best life. And he gets to, right? So then all of a sudden, he has brain cancer. And we're like, okay, we need to check him into the facility so he has some care. And they're like, okay. And they're like, okay, what does he own? Well, he owns his fifth wheel. You can have it. I don't want it. We're good.
Yeah.
But they're like, yeah, exactly, right? You have to spend it all down. But they're like, oh, and that's where when we're filling out that application, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't recommend this for him because it wasn't worth it. But it was like, he could have thrown all the stuff in a trust years and years and years ago. And they wouldn't have had to worry about it, right? It's just outside of his estate, it's not his. It's not his. So,
right.
And that's where I just want to make sure, just what kills me is when people, business owners, right? We're going 1,000,000 miles an hour, right? Helping people. And all of a sudden, the world stops spinning because you get served, right? You're being sued. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, what does this mean? Right. And then you go through, it probably doesn't mean anything. We'll get it dismissed, whatever it is. Or, you have a stroke, you have something that was completely unforeseen happens, and that's where you're like, oh, now all the time to do this stuff. That's why I wanted to do the show with you, Liz, because that's where it's like, I learned so much with, going through this process with you that I just think people need to be aware of how to perfect, right, their liens, their rights, and the perfection process, right? Because the other thing that I think I'm learning is when people are writing personal stuff out of their business account, right? So they're like, how does that mess up business owners in bankruptcy?
And it's especially true for small business owners because people don't understand you cannot commingle your personal funds with your business funds. And if you do that, you put yourself at risk of what's called piercing the corporate veil. So the corporation doesn't protect you anymore. It doesn't protect your personal assets. They can go right through and say, well, you just use this as one big piggy bank. And so all of it is fair game, your personal and the business assets, everything. We can touch everything. So you really want to make good practice, keep everything separate accounts, separate accounting. Don't pay your personal expenses out of your business account ever.
Right. Well, ever. Did you hear that? So listen to the attorney, ever. So the way that people mess this up the most, January 15th, right around the corner, right? Fourth quarter estimated tax payments are due.
Yes.
Where's all your money? It's in the business, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I owe $50,000 tax. Hey, just transfer that money, Mr. and Mrs. Bookkeeper, out of the business account, pay that off. We'll just code it as a distribution for taxes. And that's true. IRS really doesn't care. But your creditors do because they know they can blow that up in a second, right?
Absolutely, and I've done it. We've pulled money back. Go. Well, we've pulled money back where somebody pays their estimated taxes straight out of their business account to the IRS. You can't do that, so it needs to go to your personal account as a distribution, and then you pay it from
Right,
your
pay it
personal
personally.
account to
Right.
the IRS. Right. And it seems like such a small thing, like, come on, that's just technicality, but it means a lot in bankruptcy.
Right.
For sure.
Right. And that's where it's just having your affairs in order in a way. It's like you just need a couple of days of upfront time to know what's coming, right? And so it's just have the plan. Those estimated tax payments they're due quarterly. We know when they are. Just, hey, do these weeks ahead of time so you get the money going out of the right entity. And I will tell you, as a business broker, you know how much easier that makes my life to explain to buyers what they're really buying when I don't have all this personal stuff running through, right? Because you're like, oh, I'm just, the IRS doesn't care if I code it this way. But creditors do, right? Buyers of businesses do. Banks do. Banks are like, I can't understand your business, blown up. You can't give you a loan. You're not bankable. So it's just get your accounting in a place where it makes sense to other people when they look at it, instead of robbing Peter to pay Paul. And if you have to, you do. But just don't make a habit of it, right? Don't do it every payment.
And I think a lot of business owners go into business because they're good at something, not necessarily managing a business, right? So they don't know all the correct practices. They're a florist, or, they're running a restaurant or whatever, and they don't understand getting themselves into trouble by making, payments out of their business account.
Well, and that's it, right? And I think a lot of times, that bravado that defines many CPAs, right? Just I can conquer the world. I'm on it, right? Just go for it. And you've had great successes, right? By taking on challenges. And then when you get into this world, which is very specific, and then you're like, oh, all my assumptions are now completely blown up because who knew, right?
Right.
So I think those are things where that bravado will actually work against you as a business owner. That's where you don't need to be afraid, you just need to be smart about it. And that's where we're trying to give people content and context to be smart about this stuff. So what are some other mistakes people make that you see that, depending on what side, creditor or debtor side, that you'd say, hey, if they'd have done it differently, they'd have got a better outcome, but we blew it up?
Well, one thing I've been seeing recently, and this is very well intentioned by small business owners, is people taking money out of their personal funds or retirement funds or anything to keep the business going, when really the business
just let it fail.
To fail.
Right.
And nobody wants that, because they put all this time and money into the business, but you don't get that money back.
Right.
That's your personal assets, and that goes into the business. It's gone.
Well, but let's talk about that for a second though, Liz. So let's say, hey, I'm organized. I'm like, hey, the business needs money. Is there a way to lend that money to the business, get it papered, so at least I'm an unsecured?
Yes. Yeah. You can lend. You can do a loan. You can, I don't know if a security interest in your own business would necessarily work, but, in your personal individual capacity, your business then gives you uses it as collateral, but then you're on both sides of the transaction.
Right.
So that looks suspicious, but yeah, you can loan it to yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and
then pay it back. Make sure that there's loan terms. Yeah. It has to be a real loan. Right.
Reduced to writing, repayment terms, and there's payments, right? The third leg that everybody forgets. You got to make payments, right? The formalities of that, just to be respected. Now, having a business partner in your business, what does that do for you? Or an LLC, in having a business partner, what does that do if all of a sudden you find yourself in bankruptcy?
So in bankruptcy, if you have say you have an LLC, limited liability company, if you have a single member LLC, so you are the only member, it's just you, the way that the bankruptcy courts view that is basically that's you. So when you file for bankruptcy and you file individually, what comes into the bankruptcy estate is your membership interest in that LLC. If there's more than one member, it's just your membership interest, and you have to somehow value it. The trustee might be able to sell the interest, probably can't because of the operating agreement. But if you bring in, if you just have a single member LLC, the trustee can get through to those assets.
So what we took away there is that, number one, right, you can go to the Silver Flume Secretary of State portal and start your own LLC. Yay, you.
Right.
But it doesn't have an operating agreement, right? And the operating agreement has to have these protections. So in the unfortunate event that you find yourself in trouble, that all of a sudden this isn't really able to be used to satisfy those creditors, right? That's why that's why you pay the money to the attorney to have an operating agreement that has those protections in there.
True.
Right?
There is statute. If you
Okay.
don't have one, if the fallback is a statute, but it doesn't have as many protections.
It doesn't have as many protections. That's what he's
Right.
like we're just writing an operating agreement now. It's $700. Pay the $700, right? If you can't afford the $700, you can't afford to be in business.
Right.
And then lastly, I think, and it's really important, right? People I say, I don't want to partner because. In this case, you'll be glad you did, because now, right, nobody wants a charging order, right? You just point income at them, and without the ability of getting distributions, now they've got to pay the tax. Seen that work famously for people. When we come back, Liz Fletcher is going to talk about the number one thing that people do wrong when they file bankruptcy. It's Bosma on Business.
In life, things aren't scripted.
If you're an athlete, we need people like you and translate those skills to officiating.
You can get a lot out of it.
It happens in every town, in every game.
We never have a perfect game, but the rewards always outweigh the negativities.
Welcome back to Bosma on Business. Your host, Mike Bosma, with Liz Fletcher from Fletcher Law, talking about how to arrange your affairs in such a manner so that you don't need to give them all to people that shouldn't have them, or maybe not, but basically keep the assets in control of you and your family rather than to other people. It's just all about a control thing. So fine. But the other thing I wanted to ask Liz, people they just make a mess of this. Just, so if you can just have one big aha, one takeaway, what's the one thing somebody should focus on to not get sideways if they find themselves needing you?
If they have continuing to use credit cards, that's one. Taking out more debt, that's two. And then when you see the debt mounting and you decide to pay some of it because you have some money, and you pay your brother back for money that you owed, that money can be pulled back into the estate. And then your brother's out that money, and he has to file a claim in the estate. So those are really some of the bigger ones. Transferring property right before you file, you definitely don't want to do that, because it just creates a huge mess and a much longer bankruptcy case. And especially if you know that somebody's going to try and collect from you, and then you transfer. Also, even if you're not intending to hide it, if you transfer something for less than what it's worth, say you give a car to your brother and he pays you $1, that's obviously not what that car would be worth. So that can be pulled back too. Right.
Well, and I think what people miss is, right, people get cute. Okay, I know this game. I'm going to play this game, a shell game, da-da-da. Okay. I would say assume everything is going to come to the surface as to what you've done in preparation for you. So, but then also consider the cost of having to defend it. Because that's, I think, what people is completely missing this. Like, oh, yeah, I'm righteous on this. And then all of a sudden somebody's coming after you like, oh, well, what about this and that? And I'm like, are you kidding me? But they're just doing it so that when you get into litigation land, people are just trying to win. I mean, it is.
Yeah. That money goes fast too in litigation, especially when you get into discovery. And a lot of bankrupt debtors don't have the money to pay. When I file bankruptcy for somebody, it's very specific what I'm going to do. I'm going to file the bankruptcy. I'm going to go to this meeting. I'm going to do this, and that's it. If you get sued, that's a whole different thing.
Deal. Right.
You have to hire me for that. So, and most people don't have the money.
Right. No, that's it. And that's where it folds in on top of itself, because you can't afford the legal to try and justify it. So you end up capitulating. So Liz, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Again, if there's anything that you think is newsworthy, we want to talk about, I'd love to have you back. I could talk for hours with you about all this stuff. It's crazy.
Thank you so much for having me. This was
There you go. So had fun with an attorney. Now we're talking. Okay, that's a win. All right. Well, and I think speaking of wins, last week, right? I don't know. Check out that show, Liz. Louis Navalier, right? He got sued, lost $200 million to the Securities Exchange Commission, filed bankruptcy to just try and get the thing dismissed. There's a There's a strategic bankruptcy for you. That was last week. We
Wow.
can't make this stuff up. Next
Yeah.
week, Keith Jones from Stonehenge Capital is going to talk about cheap and free money in certain types of development, certain types of business or zip codes inside of Reno, and how you can get a low interest rate loan because you're in the right zip code. Until next week, guys, if there's anything we can do to help you, if you have any questions, just drop a note in DM me. If there's a tax question, tax hack, if you're wondering, how does this thing work? We'd love to be able to help you work through that. Just DM me or send me an email, mbosma@keystone.cpa. Until next week, business owners, keep that business engine humming. It's Bosma on Business.